Hey, well, friends, welcome to the Jewish Road Podcast. My name is Matt Davis, and who are you over there?
Yeah, I'm Ron.
All right. Good to have you here. And we have a special friend. Welcome, William Koenig from Brazil, but who knows? You're always all over the place somewhere. So last time we saw you was in Jerusalem at the Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast. So welcome. Good to have you here.
Thank you, Matt. A real blessing to be with you and your father.
Yeah, well, no shortage of things to talk about. Let's start with this. We're just going to go right into it. You have been White House correspondent, journalist. You are a Christian, and you love Israel. When did that start? Was there a verse? Was there an event? Was there a moment where you realized, and Israel's important, not just what we hear in the church of they're the chosen people, but what was the moment that you realized this is a thing?
Good question, Matt. I was going through commercial real estate workouts for about 5 or 6 years, and the Lord really captured me, grabbed me, took an Episcopalian. I became a born-again Christian in Southern California in 1988, 34 years of age, and I just caught fire for the Bible. And I was spending the summer in Southern California, Newport Beach area. My dad lived out there, and I went back to Dallas after the summer and got involved in 2 weekly Bible studies. So I like to say I was born again in Newport Beach at a Bob Shank Priority Living breakfast, right by the airport. And that's how I caught fire. And then when I got back to Dallas, some friends of mine were involved with Dallas Theological Seminary's President's Council. And we had some of the greatest prophecy teachers in the world, Wolbert and Ryrie and Pentecost. And they helped show that Genesis to Revelation is the Bible, and that 27% or so that's prophecy, it has to do with Israel, the Middle East, and the final days. So, and then I heard a couple of Jewish believers talking about the biblical significance of the days we're living in. So during my 6-year plus desert experience, as I was going through these workouts, I just caught fire for Israel. It was in me. I'd had Jewish friends. I didn't even know it. My last name is an Ashkenazi name. There was 5 people in the Holocaust with my exact name, according to the rabbi at the Holocaust Museum of D.C. I did a DNA through Family Tree DNA in Houston, and all of a sudden I determined that there was a Jewish heritage there that no one in my family was aware of because they had become Lutherans hundreds of years ago. So it was a combination, I think, in my DNA. Number 2, my love for my Jewish friends. And number 3 is just the opportunity to be at Dallas Seminary to hear these great teachers of the Bible speak about the biblical significance of the state of Israel and Jerusalem.
Yeah. Wow. That's great. I came from like the opposite end. In 1975, I became a believer, and here I am, Jewish, and I'm not understanding how any of this stuff goes together, And I remember sitting there with Zola Levitt, and
Oh, yes.
and he became one of my mentors. And
Interesting.
He put everything together to where I understood how all of a sudden I could believe in Jesus and still be Jewish.
That's incredible, Ron. I really appreciated Zola and developed somewhat of a relationship with him in his final years. And what a neat guy. What a great path. And Zola, when you think about how many Jewish people came to Jesus through him and his ministry is remarkable.
Yeah. I remember the first time we were talking, I said, I think God's calling me to go into Jewish ministry. And
Wow.
his response was, well, it's not an overcrowded field.
Sounds just like him.
Yeah.
Between time on the golf course and doing a ministry. I mean, I have friends that played golf with him. I guess he loved Jesus and he loved golf.
Yeah.
Well, from your time in D.C., as you've been watching and very much in the center of administrations, presidents, how have you seen the United States and the Israel relationship evolve over the decades?
Matt, that's a good question as well. I think what's interesting is, unbeknown to our presidents, they've had a very significant biblical role
Mm.
in accelerating final day events. In my book, Eye to Eye, Facing the Consequences of Dividing Israel, I go all the way back to Woodrow Wilson, who supported the San Remo Agreement of 1922, that said that Israel has a biblical and a legal right to this land. And then I look at Ronald Reagan, who was fascinated by Bible prophecy. He was a Southern Californian, loved prophecy. I think he'd even bought a few of David Hawking's books on prophecy. And I know when he was in office, when he'd start talking about the Gog Magog war, his chief of staff Reagan would say, "Ronald, let's go in this direction. Let's get off that," because he was fascinated with that,
Yeah.
and he was a friend of Israel, and then when you look at here we have uh, Jimmy Carter, Southern Baptist, who pushed the Camp David Accords, who unfortunately in some ways was anti-Semitic. I mean, he thought that Israel was a genocide state, which is totally absurd, but he played a role. And then
Yeah.
George Bush started the Madrid Land for Peace conference, and he went from the highest approval rating in history to being out of office 12 months later after he sponsored that Land for Peace conference. And that led to Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton put a lot of pressure on Israel to divide their land. And as a matter of fact, the night the Monica Lewinsky scandal broke, he was pressuring Benjamin Netanyahu, along with Al Gore and Madeleine Albright, to wait for a few days because Arafat was coming to Washington. And that scandal broke, and that was the history of the pressure. And then when we think of George W. Bush, didn't want to get involved in the peace process, but Abdullah from Jordan and Mubarak from Egypt came to Washington and convinced him that he needed to stay involved. And Crown Prince Abdullah of Saudi Arabia thought that he was siding with Israel, and he needed to do. And it really bothered him, even being a good close member of the family of the Bush family. So George W. Bush was convinced that he needed to start working on a two-state plan. He worked with Crown Prince Abdullah. They finished their work on 9/10/2001. And then the next day, 9/11. According to Washington Post, Bondar was celebrating his home in McLean, Virginia, on this two-state plan. And the next day, Bondar said, "I went from just excitement and euphoria to the fact that 15 of those 19 terrorists were Saudis." And then that stopped the two-state plan. Eventually, it was delivered the next year. That helped lead to Obama. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan led to Obama. He did the Iran nuclear deal, which brought Israel closer to their Sunni neighbors. And some of my Israeli friends said, "I never would have expected that to happen," but it did. But again, he moved the ball down the road. And then President Trump, unbeknown to him, we kept trying to tell him, "Don't touch the land, don't divide the land. You're a great friend of Israel. You've done more for Israel than all our presidents. Don't touch the land." But he and his son-in-law came together with the Peace to Prosperity plan on January 28, 2020. And when that happened, everything in his life changed. The election became a catastrophe, vote by mail. And then we had the Abraham Accord signed on September 15, 2020. A few hours later, Hurricane Sally, which is Sarah in Hebrew, slammed into the southern Gulf Coast after the Abraham Accords was signed. So, and then it led to him being defeated. And one quick note here, I had the opportunity to interview Ambassador Friedman at the Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast in 2022. And I said, you all were involved in the Land for Peace process. The Abraham Accords is a so-called peace deal, but it's really more of a business deal. And now you're dealing with Bennett and Biden instead of Trump and Netanyahu.
Right.
And that said a lot right there. So, and then obviously President Trump, again, is in a very significant biblical prophetic position. And we look at his name, Trump, as trumpet. It will certainly going to be interesting the next couple of years. But our presidents have had a very significant role, to summarize.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, a thought just popped into my head while you're talking about eye to eye. And I don't know if this has any relevance or anything, but it's stuff that's happening like right now. All of a sudden, we're seeing earthquakes all over the world. Do you have any thought on that? Is there anything there that, I mean, it could be a warning, but I don't know if there's something relational in that.
Yes, and what I watch, Ron, over the years is, and I wrote in my first eye to eye with President Bush on the cover. I had one chapter on disruption. When the White House was involved in any kind of talks or negotiations, we would have disruptive times, whether it was atmospherically with earthquakes or hurricanes or tornado outbreaks or even political problems. Things would happen. They'd back off, everything would calm. So I think what we're having right now, yeah, these are birth pangs. We haven't had a hurricane yet of any size or significance. What we've seen President Trump do is stand strong with Israel. There was a couple of events that have happened since he took office that definitely were eye to eye events. But what I've seen recently, especially with the the Iran Israel war and U.S. intervention, and then supporting Israel, do what you have to do in Gaza. They've done everything they can with Witkoff, do what you have to do. So I've seen a lot of support by President Trump, but we are, Ron, in a disruptive time, and I think that might have to do with the. Just saw yesterday that he's really going to start pushing the Abraham Accords.
Huh.
And we did an open letter to the president a couple of months ago saying Abraham Accords is great. That's wonderful if you do that. We appreciate that, but leave the covenant land of Israel out of any negotiations, because if you don't, there will be further consequences.
Yeah.
So,
I remember that letter. I jumped on and signed it.
wonderful, Ron. It was pretty much bottom line. We were
Yeah.
appreciative of what he done, but said leave the land out, the covenant land out of any future negotiations with the Abraham Accords. And so I think that they're going to push that. I know they've been trying to get a ceasefire deal done. Negotiations with Iran are not going anywhere. So I sense that they will push the Abraham Accords. And who are they going to do that with? Qatar.
Boy, oh boy.
You know about Qatar. I know about Qatar. We're going to do a lot more writing on it this weekend. So Qatar is the one that's negotiating a ceasefire with Israel and Hamas. Well, who funded Hamas? Who funded Muslim Brotherhood? Who
Qatar.
funded Al Jazeera?
Yeah.
Who bought Steve Witkoff's building, $628 million building that was underwater in Washington, in New York City?
Manhattan. Yeah.
Yeah, in Manhattan. Qatar.
Yeah.
So with that said, I think we're going to watch this carefully. We'll watch the hurricanes, the tornado outbreaks, but these quakes and even volcanoes, there's disruptiveness. What I wrote about 2 weeks ago, that 8.8 earthquake in Russia was right at the time they were having the UN meeting on two-state plan. They were having this was UK, French, and the Saudis were sponsoring a two-state meeting at the UN, and we had an 8.8 earthquake, one of the biggest in history, shake the planet. So I think also these quakes we're seeing right now, they're not only U.S., but they're affecting the planet, because they're going to, at the end of September, they're going to push real hard for a two-state plan at the UN and get the UN to vote on it. So this is another part of the disruption, Ron. Not only for the U.S., but I think this is very global right now with what we're seeing.
Well, we're already seeing lots of countries that are advocating for let's make Gaza their own nation. September, the UN vote. Everybody, we're seeing this momentum. How do we reconcile it? We're seeing this on multiple fronts. We've always known that our enemies hate us, but now we're actually seeing friendly fire from the church, and we have Christians who are coming to us and they're asking these questions like, well, what about this? We have stuff like, is Israel starving the Palestinians? Actually, somebody sent me a screenshot of an article that said Israel brags after assassinating entire Al Jazeera crew. So, for the average person that's exploring this and they're scrolling, this is explosion, right? This is explosive, and people are asking, how do we look at what's going on, and we can't separate the national Israel with the covenant people of God, and that's all of this is coming into question. How does that work, even from a reporting standpoint? What's going on there in Gaza that everybody? I'm giving you 10 questions at one time, but how is this working in Gaza that we get these reports that are coming out, the truthfulness of those, but then it gets filtered out to Western media and now the church, and now even the church is turning against Israel?
Well, there's one issue here. It's the leftist liberal media of the world. For the 25 plus years, excuse me, I've been covering this. Is the leftist media, the CNN, the BBC, New York Times, the Guardian, those four major news organizations have been so anti-Israel, and they have a lot of influence. Right? You got BBC and the British, Guardian British, and also you have New York Times, which has a huge Jewish population that subscribes to New York Times, and then CNN, which is international, and you see it at a lot of airports around the world. Those four media organizations, you can throw some others, Daily Mail and a few others in there, have been bought and paid for. There was an article a few years ago that George Soros helps fund over 200 media organizations around the world. And I know Qatar is putting big bucks in some of these media organizations too. I read an article a couple of days ago that Qatar very likely has more real estate in London now than the royal family.
Wow.
They have integrated. They have. I heard the other day they've spent over $100 billion with lobbyists in America. That will influence the media, will influence education, will influence Washington. And so what happens here, and a lot of these campus riots that we were seeing during the Biden administration, we understand it could have been Soros/Qatar are both funding some of these protests. I mean, these people don't have jobs, but they're getting paid pretty well to be protesters. Unfortunately, President Trump has really not put up with any of it on any campus, even to the extent of taking money away from these universities, which has helped dramatically and significantly. So I think the bottom line here is Israel doesn't have a chance. And I go to a lot of media events in Israel and have over the years. And that's always been, what do we do? How do we change it? Well, there's an anti-Semitic root that still exists in Europe. According to Ron Dermer, who's one of the chief advisors to Netanyahu, who used to be the U.S. ambassador, Israel's ambassador to the U.S., told us once, anti-Semitism has gone underground, but it's never completely died, and it will resurface. And that was 10 or 12 years ago. And that's what we're seeing. So we have the anti-Semitic and the well-funded efforts to make Israel the bad guy. And I love what Ambassador Huckabee's been saying. I mean, come on. Let's call Hamas what they are. They're a terrorist organization. Look what they've done to Gaza. Look what Hezbollah's done to Lebanon and Syria. And Israel's at fault for defending themselves? What would we do if we had Hamas living inside of Washington, D.C. or near Washington, D.C. or Toronto or Paris or other cities? It's just absurd. And that's our biggest battle right now. The media and the influencers. The influencers is the big buzzword now for people on the internet. Well, a lot of them are getting funded by some of these nefarious groups, and that's another problem, Matt.
So
big problem.
I think when Christians look at all this stuff, and there's a lot of well-meaning people out there, but how do they navigate the tension that exists between, you know, what's taking place and the story that they're getting? Like, for example, what nation in the world ever was at war with another nation and then had to feed everybody at the same time? How do they make
It,
any
it,
sense
it,
out of that? Where do they go with
oh,
that?
that is huge. I mean, they're at war at the same time feeding the population.
Yeah.
We hear it, but those that oppose Israel don't want to hear it. It goes in one ear and out the other.
Hmm.
It's as have no relevance. It's absurd. But we're also living in a time of deception, spiritual deception, and unfortunately, in the United States, we still have a large percentage of our church that are replacement theology. There's about 35% of America's evangelical, 65% Protestants and Catholics. And I did a poll a few years ago. We have 100 million people that go to church in the United States that have no understanding, biblical understanding of the significance of the state of Israel prophetically, because they don't study that part of the Bible. They believe it's allegorical or not literal. And that's another huge problem we're facing in America. So and I've talked to my friends that have been on the front line. I've spoken at Lutheran churches, Episcopal churches. I've spoken to Methodists. I still, and I say this every time I'm in these groups that are trying to speak, trying to determine what do we do? How do we do? How do we educate? How do we inform? I still think being born again is the absolute key. If we're born again, we get it.
Right.
If we're born again, we receive the Spirit of God living in us and we see it for what it is. And I think that's one of the key factors. And another reason we're not having significant success in getting more people supportive of the state of Israel, because they're not born again and they don't study the biblical significance or understand the biblical significance of Israel in the state of Israel and the city of Jerusalem today.
Well, it's a numbers game as well, right? We have
That's
15
yeah.
million Jews in the world, and we have the silencing of the Christians, right? Where we could have more numbers if Christians would stand up, but there's less and
Yes.
less that are speaking out or saying anything. And then, unfortunately, we have other voices like a Tucker Carlson, like a Candace Owens, and even a Kanye West. And it's very easy for people to just say, "Well, he's nuts, he's crazy," but in one post, he can reach more people than there are Jews in the world.
Yeah.
And if they're not discerning, what dangers are you seeing in some of these things that are coming out? Because it's not just that we can't write them off as crazy. They have millions and millions of viewers who are just taking everything they say at face value and not doing any research on it.
Well, a friend of mine about a year ago said, "Bill, we need to do what we can to counter what Tucker Carlson's saying," and we didn't at that time. We may do that. Tucker Carlson was really seeking and searching about a year and a half ago, I think. I think his sister is a born again believer. I'm not sure. But he was really seeking and searching. And all of a sudden, I think just the devil uh, demonically influenced him to the point he can't even see straight. I mean, he can't control himself. Even watching him interview Candace Owens, what a joke. If you want to watch a joke, so a YouTube interview, and I watched Candace Owens, who I used to just think was incredible.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
solid, so conservative, so articulate. And watching her come against Israel in that interview with Tucker Carlson, I said, my gosh, look at
What
her.
happened?
She's out of, yeah, what happened? And she's out of control. So I
Yeah.
think it's a spiritual warfare component. And I think that are these guys are they on Qatar's payroll also? Supposedly Candace Owens' husband's very wealthy from a British family. Tucker Carlson's made a fortune. But there's something that both those people have changed, and to the point of being harsh and possessed. I don't know them personally to make that statement, but if you watch them nonverbally and listen to their answers and listen, it's even almost a hate. I mean, Candace Owens' interview was unbelievable. I couldn't believe. I mean, this is an articulate young lady that's all of a sudden out of control,
Yeah.
attacking Israel. I mean,
Yeah.
come on.
Yeah.
You're not connecting the dots. You're sitting
Well,
here I mean, come on. I mean, you're just not dealing with the reality.
Yeah, and it seems like it's the whole world is trending this way, and of course we know in the end times this is the direction it's going to go. I think the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, just recently came out with some statistics that almost half of the adult population worldwide bears some anti-Semitism to some degree, you know, and we can see it trending that way. And of course, Zechariah tells us in chapter 12 that all of the nations are going to come against Jerusalem ultimately, and then that's in Zechariah 12:3. And then in verse 9, God says, I will wipe out all of the nations that come against Israel.
Yeah, what's interesting about 12:3 too is Jerusalem will become a burdensome stone.
Yeah.
And that I'd say virtually almost every leader, there's a few that are not, but almost most leaders in the world believe that Jerusalem needs to be divided. So, and like you're mentioning there, Zechariah 12:9, God will deal with those nations that come against Israel and come against Jerusalem. And I mean, what we're seeing at the UN, possibly in September, is an indicator right now. Some of the things businesses and corporations and some of the pressure that they're putting on Israel right now uh, from Europe. And I know that there's been boycotts and protests of products that have been made in Judea and Samaria. Well, the best paid people in Israel, the best paid Palestinians in Israel work in those facilities in Judea and Samaria. They have a good quality of life, and they've been impacted. Unfortunately, yeah, we're this is a spirit of deception. It's an antichrist spirit that is prevalent and spreading throughout the world, and it's a spirit of deception, final day deception.
It's 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 easy to sit here in the United States and look over there and say, well, poor Israel, poor Jewish people over there. But what we're seeing that is really with Israel at the epicenter has now spread to Europe. It's back. That root that went buried for a little while in Europe is now springing up again. We were just talking about even some new regulations, restrictions coming against El Al. Will you speak into that a little bit more, and even how it's going to jump the Atlantic and start to make its way? We're already seeing it here in the United States.
Yeah, it's definitely happening, man. And I think the other thing is the use of TikTok. That was a big concern in Israel. Is that TikTok was being used to instigate conflicts between Jews and Arabs in small communities within Judea and Samaria, something that they didn't have a problem with in the past. But how TikTok, especially about a year and a half ago, was really being used as a tool to instigate problems between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And we're seeing TikTok used here in America, X to a certain extent, but TikTok is with their algorithm tricks and methods is a big problem. And China's not a friend of Israel either. So I think that's something we're watching very closely with the TikTok and social network influence.
We speak a little bit more into what you've seen with El Al in some of the countries in Europe.
Well, they're supposedly yesterday they talked about the French going to restrict some of the visas for the workers of El Al in France. Belgium is considering something of that sort right now as well.
Hmm.
Spain has been saying some things recently, and I can put it this way: if France does it, Belgium will do it. Then in Netherlands, there was some concern that they might do the same thing. So if they start putting restrictions on visas that can be used for El Al workers in these airports in Europe, then that can have a big influence. And what happens is all it takes is a couple countries to do it, and they all get the same idea, and then they start doing it. So some of these visa restrictions for some of the Israeli companies that do business in Europe could become very problematic. And El Al's a good example right off the bat.
Yeah. Well, how do you think, given all of this, how can Christians affirm God's covenant with Israel while still acknowledging the nuance that's there when they're lamenting civilian loss and all of these things?
That's a great question, Ron. I think there's probably two ways. Number one, just saying, framing it differently, that what would the United States do if they had a Hamas within, or a Hezbollah on the Canadian or Mexican border, or a country, possibly Mexico or Canada, that's calling for the elimination of the United States and calling us a great Satan? Kind of framing it, look what Israel's going through. This is the only peaceful democracy, a true peaceful democracy in the Middle East. Framing it differently, using the United States as an example. What if we were where Israel is, or dealing with what Israel is? Israel just wants to be left in peace and security to be a productive member of the international community. That's number one. Number two, the prophetic, the biblical. And when I talk to Jewish people, and many of them are secular, I say, you can tell the stress on them. And I say, we're living in the time of your Jewish prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Zechariah, Daniel. And I walk them through what the Bible says about the time we're living in. And they go, yes, that's true. Yes. Wow, wow, wow. And then I tell them about what Jesus said in the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24. So it depends on the individual and however the Holy Spirit leads you. But these are great opportunities. So number one is in the natural, explain the difference, U.S., Israel, and then the supernatural or the biblical, and explain to them that we're moving into a very significant time biblically. And my Arab and Jewish friends that I've worked with at the White House, and I'll mention to them, I said, you've heard of Armageddon. Oh, yes, the apocalypse. And I said, do you realize that Armageddon is a final battle for Jerusalem? They don't. And then I explain what the final battle of Jerusalem will be like. And then our Messiah, as a Christian, our Messiah, Jesus, will return at the end of Armageddon to reign from earth. So there's opportunities, there's clarity, but also opportunities for us to turn this time into opportunities for us to share the gospel and point people to God's time clock, which is Jerusalem and the state of Israel.
Yeah, Jesus said that the road that leads to eternal life is narrow, and the path that leads to destruction is wide. And we've been trying to think, the people who are journeying along with us at the Jewish road and coming along this journey, is that we were trying to think of a name. What do we call people that are not only believers, they love the Lord, but they love Israel, they prioritize Israel and the Jewish people. They've not forgotten the covenant. What do we call these people? And every group has their their the family, the tribe, but we really look at the people who are aware and awake to what's going on. We call them the few. And these are the people, not the Marines, but these are the few, because there are very few people that actually get it. And I love that we want to be able to walk with our Jewish brethren and be able to say, look, we're not making this up. This is not the right side of the Bible, the New Testament. Like, this is in the Tanakh. This is why we want to be able to prepare Gentiles and teach the church. This is how we reach the Jewish people, is the gospel is embedded there in the Hebrew scriptures. And unfortunately, the church doesn't know this. And so that's where we get to sit in this little space and say, look, here is the gospel. Just like you have the Roman road, we're trying to teach people this is the Jewish road. And the time
That's
is
great.
short, and the time is essential right now to be able to do that. We have to be able to shift not just a political mindset that we're looking at. This is what's going on with Israel and the shifting of the nations, but this is opportunity to be able to bring comfort, right? This is Isaiah 40, comfort ye, my people, that we can actually bring this message of hope. And I love that you're doing that amongst the Jewish people.
Well, thank you, Matt. The same with you and Ron. I mean, you're doing the exact same thing, and there's such an opportunity. And I really, again, I do believe being born again. We are called Christian Zionists. We hear from Israel. We don't know where we would be without the support of the evangelicals. They're learning the difference between evangelicals, Protestants, and Catholics. But our passion for Israel, for the Jewish people, just reading a book the other day. It's the Spirit of God that lives in us, which is God living in us that loves the chosen people. The Jewish people are still the chosen people, and we've been grafted in. We're grafted in. And I think what an opportunity, and with what you and Ron do, pointing people to the biblical significance, the Jewish road and the Jewish background of our faith. And um, people, some people forget that Jesus was Jewish.
Yeah.
They don't even they don't even think about it. So a long answer or long comment here is the fact is, thank God that we are born again and that fully understand the biblical significance of the time that we're living in, because there's a lot that don't. So that's our opportunity, is one by one, when you sit and explain to people, even taking a couple minutes of connecting some dots. I have a Jewish friend and I connect some dots. He said, I've never heard
Yeah.
what you shared with me the last 10 or 15 minutes. You need to share this with many. And that's what you do. And they need to like put things in perspective of where we are, how we got here, and connect some dots for them, and let the Holy Spirit lead and guide and direct. And we're all going to have great results if we continue to be obedient to God's calling at this time for us and for you.
Yeah. Well, thinking about that, are there any, upcoming events or global shifts? I know we're looking at Trump and Putin meeting together very soon here. Are there any of these things that you think could be pivotal for Israel in the near future?
Well, my wife Tanya and I, and she says hi to you guys. We had such a great
Yes.
time with y'all in Israel back in May and June. Um, Tanya's watching the European Union very, very closely, having lived in the Netherlands for 32 years. And matter of fact, she'd even done trade trips with Mark Rutte, who's now the Secretary General of NATO.
Mhm.
So she has a great perspective on him. Tanya's watching that closely. We both watch Israel very, very closely. Obviously, we're concerned about Qatar's influence. Uh, we've been on writing about Steve Witkoff since November of last year. Steve has had one success. That was the hostage deal that he did with a deadline of the inauguration that Trump said, that must be done or all hell will break loose. And that's all he's accomplished. So I think that we're also watching, Tanya had the opportunity to meet Putin with Mark Rutte on a trade mission. And he's really a conservative guy. And obviously he thinks the Ukraine is still part of the Soviet Union. So that's kind of a complex situation. But I think that the meeting coming up on Friday between Putin and Trump will be very interesting. I know that Europe right now and also Zelensky are not confident. It sounds like Trump wants to say, okay, you have this land now, Vladimir, you keep the land, you keep Crimea, and then the war will be over. Well, the Europe and Ukraine is not excited about that. They're not excited about that direction. So, long answer to your question, Ron. I think, as usual, we watch Turkey closely. He's
Yeah.
very problematic. Watching Erdogan. Iran still has some serious weapons, and we were concerned they're getting hypersonic missiles from China. We were very concerned about the time of the end of the war, that if that war had been extended, we would have seen some Chinese hypersonic missiles used by Iran. That's a concern. And then also watching China make a move on Taiwan. Taiwan Semiconductor makes 90% of the sophisticated chips in the world. If China gets control of Taiwan Semiconductor or Taiwan, that could be very problematic worldwide. And then obviously, what's going to happen at the UN in late September? They boycotts, pressure. I don't know what they're going to do, but we continue to pray for President Trump and also especially Prime Minister Netanyahu at this very significant time, because he even has coalition problems with the Orthodox Jews and a couple of members of the right wing. I mean, his government could collapse. So I just threw a lot out, but those, as a watchman, which you guys are too, these are the 5 or 6 areas that we're watching very closely. Again, Iran, Turkey, Russia, the EU, NATO pressure on Israel, and also the United States influence. So we're going to watch this closely. I think the upcoming meeting at the UN regarding a Palestinian state, it fizzled early in June because of the war. It fizzled again because Trump just basically, and then also what fizzled because of the 12-day war twice. And then they did have their meeting last week. But I think that's another thing that we're concerned about, is at what level of pressure can they apply on Israel. But again, I continue to pray for President Trump. He's been a strong advocate of Israel's right
Yeah.
to defend themselves.
It's dizzying trying to keep up. And I'd say that, all of us are aware and watching and probably a little too stuck in the everyday headlines. And I think the encouragement is still, and we talk about this a lot, but not just the politics or the geopolitics, but asking if we get lost in all of the movements of the world, the tectonic political shifts, to be able to step out of that for a second and say, theopolitically, God, what are you up to in these days? Help me not lose sight, because that's the minutia, that's the trees. Help me to take a step back and see the forest of what God is doing and his timetable in his word. And even some of these things, you say you're a Christian Zionist and evangelical, and you're talking about Trump and Netanyahu, and all of these things are uh, now hated. Like these used to be good things, and now they're so like uh, it's just a crazy world. And so the call for us is to be able to look at what God is doing. What I love about what you're doing in your ministry at watch.org is you're keeping people abreast and you're watching so that they don't have to get lost in everything else that's going on. Can you give us a little bit of just the ministry of what you're doing as a watchman?
Well, thank you, man. We've had watch.org for about 26, 27 years. We post news 365 days out of the year. World news is biblically relevant with a focus on Israel and the Middle East. And we're shifting a lot of that to williamkoenig.com. That's William Koenig, Koenig.com, where Tanya writes, where I write. I know you appreciated some of the things that Tanya has written in her insight,
Yeah.
things that I'm writing. We're going to be doing more and more there. We more interviews, more behind the scenes things that we're seeing. So we're going to we have watch.org, but williamkoenig.com is going to become a more significant role for us in terms of our writing and also sharing some of the things that we're seeing through some of our sources that we've developed, Tani through the European Union, even here in Brazil, and then me in the United States and Israel, the Middle East. So it's just an opportunity, like what you guys are doing. We're on the front line, and to use a football term, we're at the Super Bowl. I mean, this is the Super Bowl. Not sure when the Super Bowl will end, but nonetheless, we are on the front line of one of the most interesting, biblically significant times in history,
Yeah.
and we have a front row seat. So as you guys, as we are, we're going to continue to be watchmen to keep people informed. But I think something I appreciate what Tanya's done. She's really called the watchmen and all of us to also take what we're seeing to prayer. I think sometimes as a watchman we report it, but
Yeah.
just because that's our role. But if we can report it and then call to prayer for Netanyahu, call to prayer for Trump and others, I think it's a very important time and a very, very important thing for us as watchmen to not only present what we're seeing, but also call people to prayer.
Well, amen. Tanya is incredible. She's prophetic. She speaks in prayer, and we love her.
Right.
We love the work you're doing. And like you said, we're not just in the Super Bowl, we're at the red zone. And
I like that. Yeah.
2 minute warning.
yeah.
Yeah. It seems like it.
Yeah.
It does seem like it.
Well, Bill, thank you for friendship. Thank you for we both got to see some fun, new, exclusive things while in Israel, and hope to get back there soon and reconnect with you guys. And thank you for taking some time out of the Brazilian schedule, the Brazilian life, and joining us here on the Jewish Road podcast. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Matt, Mark. What a treat to be with you. Or Matt and Ron.
You're just going through the Gospels.
Frank
It's
and
all right.
Matt and Ron.
Matthew and Mark.
God bless you.
We'll go tell Luke and John. They're on their way.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I love it. Well, thank you guys.
Yep. Shalom, brother.
Shalom.